Hello, everyone. Once again, we are live here for another Payble webinar. It's so good to see so many familiar faces. I have with me Vanessa here today. Vanessa, do you want to say hi to everyone?
Really great to see you on the webinar. Really looking forward to today. It's going to be very insightful.
So Vanessa's our payment experience lead here at Payble and also very passionate about the economy as well, connecting with a number of different councils in the last couple of months to help them with their strategy. But I think now that we've waited for a couple of the stragglers, we might get into the content of today's webinar. So this is the first disclaimer we've ever done. So we're probably getting into the big leagues now. We need to do a disclaimer for these webinars. But these are my views and not financial advice. And I thought it was funny. Some of the economists who I've quoted in here don't even agree with each other. So I think there's no danger in perceiving this as anything other than general commentary. But please get your own independent advice before making any decisions. What is an interesting milestone moment is when we gave a similar talk to this last year. There were only 20 or so councils using Payble, both our platform and our advice. And now we've been able to increase that substantially. As a quick note, I haven't shared this before in this online setting, but there's a bit of a funny history in my family with local government. So my great uncle was actually the mayor of Leichhardt, which is now Inner West Council here in Sydney. And I think it's kind of amazing that we're on here now talking about local government and local government strategy when my uncle actually wrote a book on local government, probably one of the few that was ever written so far. Let's get into the material today. I've mentioned this from time to time. In 2021, we said, hey, there's going to be a lot of pressure on the sector given the pressures of COVID and the fact that most people felt like those arrears amounts were written off when actually they were simply moved forward in time, often without interest or penalties. But Victoria was kind of the first hotspot where it all came to fruition, where the research started to translate into policy and also into media writing. So we saw this 11.6% average arrears level through our research, and also saw that there was a 32% surge in the arrears volume, which was just crazy growth compared to what we saw a few years ago. Vanessa, Victoria was where it all began, and coming into the local government space yourself, we've chatted a lot about Victoria so far, haven't we?
Yeah, gosh, absolutely. I mean, it's almost 40% of the national total in terms of arrears, and it's over sort of 900 million. So it's quite a significant amount, really, and it's just on the rise.
What we've done is put together these 5 years of warning signs into a national report, the first of its kind. And what are your thoughts on the approach?
Oh, I think it's been a great team effort across everyone. So thank you for everyone in the Payable team. And we've all been working with, I think, sort of 99% of all councils actually to aggregate all this data. So it's very robust.
This is still a work in progress. I'm really proud of the document in its current form, but we need people like you to work with us and help us craft this. So over the next few years, the goal is for it to be a national standard. And the other night, I was able to chat with Mr. Albanese for a couple of sentences, and I mentioned this report. And if people don't know, he originally worked to support the Minister for Local Government when he was getting into politics. So he has a little bit of a soft spot for us in the sector. So I'm hoping that we can keep campaigning to change things, not only through technology, but also policy. Let's look at some of the different numbers here. And this number is pretty intimidating for us when we look at it, this $2.4 billion rise in arrears, but let's break it down a little bit. So what's really been alarming to me is you'd expect some arrears growth given our need to increase rates. And we'll talk a lot in this webinar about inflation and some of those pressures. But what the major problem is when you have the growth in unpaid rates outstripping the growth in the rates charged, this becomes a really unsustainable position. And as you can see that now there's this delta between these two numbers, which is quite alarming. So one thing I might pause on here is, do you want to share your percentage growth in rates charged year on year for your council? And you'll see the differential between all the different states and territories. So we have our first, Rachel, I think, has shared 3.9% there. Yeah, so there's a few coming in now, back around 8%, which is bang on the national average. So what's crazy too is if we think about it, any number that's greater than, say, 3.5%, 4%, that's greater than inflation and what it's been at over the last period. So that means it's going to be a huge impact for the household wallet, right? What I think is an interesting number now is the national average is now 8.3%, which is astronomical, given that most of the target benchmarks are between that 4 to 5% range, depending on state. It's now starting to slide out of control. There's also a forecast increase this year on this $2.4 billion amount, 2.6 billion, so a growth of 200 million in the next 12 months, which is very, very rapid, right? So the national data, not just where we started. Remember, we started in Victoria and speaking with rates teams. Now we've analysed all the national financial statements, and we're seeing and predicting this growth of 200 million. So let's talk about why arrears are rising. Vanessa, you're a homeowner and also an avid investor. Do these numbers alarm you, and what do you feel locally where you live?
Yeah, gosh, absolutely. I mean, I live on the Gold Coast, and prices here, property, are absolutely skyrocketing to the point where unit prices are almost the same as Sydney's, and a median house price is sitting at 1.4 million, which is significant compared to, for example, to 5 years ago.
And so what we've seen is house prices across the nation have shot up by historical proportions, and now that ability to service the mortgage is catching up on everyone. And if prices peel back, like we've started to see across certain regions, this becomes really dangerous because you have what's called a negative equity situation, right? And in one of my previous webinars, I talked about the dangers of this for new homeowners using up to only 5% deposits to secure mortgages. So the people that put together this table in a podcast 3 or 4 days ago actually predicted that house price growth would reduce or decline by the largest amount in 10 years. So not only is it hard for people to pay the mortgage, but we are probably going to see some backwards movement. Another thing I wanted to talk about was the oil prices. This was the price here at 77. Everyone at the talk was saying, oh, it's positive. We feel like oil prices have stabilized, or there's talks of treaties, etc. But you can see that despite that optimism, the oil price has actually crept back up again. And if you were to equate this over the last 12 months, that's actually a 19% increase in oil prices. So when you look at it in this graph, it looks optimistic. But when you compare it to what oil cost 12 months ago, it really is going to create significant inflationary pressure in the economy. And I think there's one final comment about increasing hardship applications at Bellingen. So seeing hardship applications increase is a really good leading indicator of a lagging situation, which is this economic hardship, right? And as you can see, this inflation is still persistent despite some of these improvements in recent times, and it coming back down from that peak. Persistent inflation is not what the RBA likes to see. And so this is one of the major stories. So I've framed this for today for our learning as the double whammy. So the double whammy is we do see a prediction in the market to increase interest rates further. And what is a really understood or misunderstood notion is how much this costs us as taxpayers, $4 billion so far. So this means that every single month that we extend this policy, think of all the projects and the works and the grants that you could receive too that aren't currently going into the economy. So really difficult situation. That's why I've called it the double whammy, because when you get these future interest rate rises, and you get this fuel excise relief pending to be stopped next month or perhaps the month after if it's extended, that's the perfect storm conditions in the economy we don't like to see. With councils, we've seen this rates up 7.2% in a year. This is the steepest rise we've had in over 10 years. And so that's further going to make it difficult or squeeze households further. Even though we all know that it's necessary, all of our costs have gone up, so we need to pass them on. I think the Victorian government showed some leadership here to try and create policies to allow councils to meet the needs of the ratepayers. The bar for evidence was lowered. There was more breathing room while people were assessed, so there's no interest application or enforcement. And bill smoothing was made a standard. So this is the policy that we're expecting to start to roll out across your different states and territories on the back of what we've seen there. What was interesting is the difference between regional and metro, and here are the averages across metro Australia, and we see that arrears growth is significant and the average level of rates unpaid. Did you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yes, of course. So of those councils there, so we've got just under 400 councils within that regional area, and rates that are unpaid, that's sitting at 8.1% at the moment. But that number on the right-hand side, that 12.5%, that's the arrears growth which has happened. So that's a significant number, which I think it should absolutely be a cause for slight concern there, and to be looking at what ways can councils decrease that number, how can we actually get that more under control so that arrears growth is actually slowing and decreasing is ideally where we want to see it.
We've had a few thumbs up, or at least one thumbs up, for give councils a share of stamp duty. It's not actually a bad policy, that one, in terms of stamp duty revenue. I think that idea isn't too bad. I think the question is more, well, if house prices have gone up and everyone's richer, then certainly they can afford to pay the rates. But I think it's a little bit like saying, just because I'm doing well at work and I've had a pay rise and successive pay rises, I now should have a higher borrowing level on my personal credit card. So I think what we see is if people are tapping into borrow to pay their rates or to access equity, I think we need to do more research into those trends, and I can do so and get back to you all in 3 to 6 months as I do some interviews with the community. But from the trends that I'm seeing, there's a massive uptick in people paying with card, and that is one of the leading indicators to show us that people are struggling to pay their rates. State by state, let's break down some of the numbers. We talked about Victoria already and the growth there. I don't think there's any need to continue. The positive thing is there are some councils bucking the trend. The second council I wanted to talk about was New South Wales. What was interesting is the arrears growth rate. Historically, New South Wales has had a relatively healthy arrears level, but we see now it's crept over the benchmark, and also that arrears growth shot up from the year before. Queensland is where you're based, Vanessa, and it's really, really alarming, the trends around Brisbane, the greater Brisbane area, with all the major councils going through quite significant struggles. Did you want to talk about that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the arrears growth rate for Queensland, it's sitting at 6.5%. So we need to look at how we can adjust that, and especially in terms of the arrears and that number, which is increasing, and that 545 million. I mean, that's a lot of money. And how does council recoup it?
I don't want to name particular councils here, but what we've seen is also a massive regional migration shift. So many people, for a better life, better weather, have moved up to Queensland, particularly around the Brisbane metro area. And councils are under pressure to deliver services to more people than ever before. What's been excellent for Western Australia is that the arrears growth is actually a lot lower than the rates growth. And a lot of the outstanding money we see is in the regional areas, which are dependent a lot on large contributors and mining companies as primary ratepayers. So they're not as useful for this analysis. We'll also see people struggle to pay in full. and we'll see a little bit more of that arrears growth come to the fore. But for now, Western Australia is rather strong, but given its exposure to mining, that's also an alarming trend if mining slows down. Now, for South Australia, this is a really significant deterioration in finances. So South Australia has almost been the bastion of health in terms of arrears over the last 10 to 15 years. We've seen almost a 15% arrears growth levels. But Tasmania is the wonderful story here. Tasmania still seems to be that stable area. They've actually had a decrease in their arrears growth, and all the numbers are sitting within the benchmark. So again, we need to look to our friends in Tassie, and really excited to welcome Launceston, Latrobe and Kentish councils in Tasmania to the Payble family as well, which is really great. And Northern Territory is another area that we wanted to assess. So the arrears rate is the second largest in the nation. And it is worthy to note that some of the larger metro councils in NT are starting to see some of those struggling signs. But I'd say that my level of concern is not as high. We wanted to ask CEOs and mayors what they said as well. So we worked with ALGA to put out the first survey we've ever done around financial sustainability. And they were extremely concerned. Individuals were less concerned about their own council and more concerned about the sector at large. So this is an interesting set of numbers because it shows leadership now knows this is a problem. Leadership is now thinking about it, which is different to 2 to 3 years ago, where many rates teams and finance teams who were screaming for help, asking for that support, were falling on deaf ears. Now we'll see more councils taking a front foot step to resolve these things. I think what I'd like to show is how we can fix it. So we've identified 5 different areas and things to turn the tide here. The first one is that we want to smooth what's owed across the entire year. And as we saw, that was a precedent that's been brought in from Victoria. It's interesting how many people get a rates notice that just has a rather large amount. And there's no way they can do anything about that. Using that smoothing method across the entire year is a really good practical strategy to try and reduce this problem. The second thing is allowing people to propose an amount. So Vanessa, did you want to touch on this at all?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this is what we do at Payble, that some ratepayers might like to align when they pay rates with, for example, when they're paid their salary, if that's weekly, if it's fortnightly, monthly. And that's something which we're able to do as well. And so we help make it easier and just smooth out that payment process and the frequency for ratepayers.
The third one is we need reminders, right? And it's really difficult to get people to pay, and so they leave it and then it only balloons. So it's really important to get ahead of the problem with those regular communications, and we've seen efficacy to do that. The other thing is when you make flexible payments the default, or this bill smoothing, because what's interesting is you start to receive payment in advance of the due date. And that improvement to your cash flow can be reinvested in terms of interest or offsetting your debts. So we've seen some success doing this. And the fifth one is we feel that uniting the notice and the payment is the significant breakdown in the market today. Joining the notice and the ability to payment creates more of a seamless workflow where you can get less people in arrears and work your way out of it. A couple of councils that I think are worth looking at is Whitehorse, where Whitehorse was able to improve in their state-based arrears rankings, which we'll show you in a second, and also how they were able to improve the satisfaction. And the main way they did that was putting in those automated hardship suggestions. So back on this slide, where they now allow people to suggest an amount. Another one is Greater Dandenong, which does have a lot of disadvantage and a lot of economic hardship. They have a arrears rate that's under the average, which you wouldn't expect now for Victoria, and it's improving. And that's because those flexible payments are now the default. So a couple of good councils to look at in terms of proxies. So now we have where it's all got to. So the report and what you can do with this data. So you'll be able to look up your council from the top ranking all the way to wherever it fits in the list. I wanted to preface this as saying this isn't a name and shame. It's about publicly surfacing the data and allowing you to see how you can improve relative to other councils around you over the next 12 to 24 months. So what I've got here is a list of the top 10 councils in each state. You'll find that in the report. So I think what we'd like to do, if you're open to it, is I'm happy to break down your arrears ranking in a bit more depth. So this report has some headline metrics, but I'll look at the councils around you, analyze a little bit about the website and some of the policy that I can find. And I'll also bring in some other metrics which are a little bit more complex that I didn't want to include in this year's report, just to make sure it was simple and readable for everyone. So if you want to, you can scan the QR code here and we'll work on that together with you. Some things I can suggest there is, it's funny, it's not actually about the arrears. It's about making sure that the general population have the easiest way to pay that has the best customer experience. Because if we're able to drive most of the people into the options that work for them, like the bill smoothing, the people that fall to the arrears bucket over time will reduce. I think that's the problem in the industry today. There's been a polarity between thinking about solutions for people in arrears and then just the general population. It's a solution that needs to cover everyone. The final thing is, I believe there's a bit of a shift required to reward councils through further grants who are able to knock their arrears on the head. Similar to how we reward people for putting money into their self-managed super fund. So if we know that reduced arrears result in better and more sustainable councils, that reduces the risk long-term on us needing to bail out or provide assistance to councils in the future. So there needs to be some sort of scheme to incentivize councils to erode arrears and to receive rewards that are proportional to the size of the problem that they're tackling. That is something that doesn't exist today. And just to wrap, if you're a Payble council today and you feel like you're happy to share your story or also share some of your data to help others, let us know in terms of the team, and we'd love to connect you with some of the councils that want to get on top of this problem as well, so we can help each other. But for now, look forward to that report, finding your ranking, and reach out to the team and and we'll help you get on top of it. We really appreciated the session, and let's keep our fingers crossed that we don't get the double whammy. We want those fuel prices to stabilize and hopefully interest rates too. So let's keep that positive mindset and enjoy the World Cup in the remainder. We'll talk to you soon.